law
That's right.
by changing state statute.
Yes.
So the other 8 are about DCFS internal procedures. Well, George Sheldon then left Illinois, took a job in Florida. And that was after he came here. He was here the day of Semaj's
Funeral.
visitation and funeral, and he and I stopped by the home. We met with a lot of county leaders from the coroner's office, the sheriff's office, the state's attorney's office, the county executive's office. We stopped by 309 Lewis Road and walked around the house. So this was the day before it was burnt to the ground, of course.
And we met here too.
Wait, yeah, I'm sorry. This was our first stop.
Right, you came here first and they answered a lot of those questions for us. Fortunately, it's gone. I think that's good.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention. So George Sheldon was still director of DCFS when this quality assurance review was released. Then he left, moved back to Florida, and on Monday, June the 26th, the new director of DCFS was named, appointed by Governor Ron. Her name is Beverly Walker. She goes by BJ. She worked in Illinois when Jim Edgar was governor, and then she moved down to Georgia and ran the DCFS of Georgia. And so she was appointed on Monday. On Tuesday, I got to ask her questions in committee. And I wrote a letter to the Herald News that you might have seen in last Sunday's paper about the 4 questions that I asked her. And one question I asked her was, what's the status of DCFS implementing these recommended changes?
Right.
And she understandably said to me, it's only my 2nd day on the job. Give me some time to become familiar with them. I also asked her about local resources, because when I read this and saw frequent mentions of the fact that Cherie couldn't get to doctor's appointments because she didn't have transportation, couldn't get to parenting classes because she didn't have transportation. I'm an English teacher, not a social worker, but I kept writing in the margins like Will County Center for Community Concerns and Catholic Charities and other organizations that perhaps could have helped her out. And so I asked Acting Director Walker, do you think that local nonprofit organizations, local units of government have a role to play in helping DCFS assist families? And she said, yes, we can't do this alone, which I was glad to hear. Now, on that note, I want to tell you this, that the last conversation I had with George Sheldon, I brought this up. I told him what I just told you, that when I read this, I was writing the names of local agencies in the margins as organizations that perhaps could have helped the family that they've been asked to help. And I said to then Director Sheldon, I said, would it be helpful to have like Mike Hennessy, who's head of the United Way of Will County, go to the DCFS office on Jefferson Street and make them familiar with all the local resources? And he said, yeah, that'd be a great idea. Yeah, but that was kind of my reaction too, like, what? You haven't thought of this? But I was glad to hear that he endorsed that, and I was glad to hear that the current director endorsed that. Again, she believes that local resources could be very useful in helping families. Yes?
Will we have access to the policy report from the Child Protection Services?
It's public record. It's out there. If you want to email, make sure I have your email address. I'll email it to you. It was made public.
Here, you can look at it. So you yes. Okay, and again, in this last meeting with George Sheldon, he said that he had secured free help from a group called Casey Family Services based in Seattle, Washington, which is a really well-regarded organization. He had gotten an agreement with them that they would come to Illinois and they would do an analysis of what he called DCFS front-end services. So what DCFS does with families. And so in that hearing on June 27th, they asked the acting director, BJ Walker, are you going to take advantage of Casey Family Services offer? And she said, yeah, I'm going to talk to them this week and make arrangements for them to come. And then 2 days after I had the opportunity to ask those questions of the acting director, I met with the 2 lawyers from the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, who are monitoring a consent decree between the federal government and DCFS. So somebody a few years ago filed a lawsuit against DCFS. And there's a consent decree. So a federal judge told DCFS, you got to do these things. And the consent decree is known as BH. BH is probably some child's initials. So I met with Julie Morrison, who's a state senator who's head of the Human Services Committee, which has oversight for DCFS. She and I met with these ACLU lawyers, and they know a lot. They really know a lot about the nitty-gritty of DCFS. And I guess you would call them friendly critics of DCFS. So they are constantly suggesting to the judge and to DCFS how DCFS can do a better job. And finally, I mentioned Senator Julie Morrison. She chairs the Human Services Committee. She's planning another hearing with Acting Director Walker. It's tentatively set for Tuesday, July 25th in Chicago. So the former State of Illinois building, 160 North LaSalle, known as Atlantic Building. That's where we anticipate having the hearing. I don't know what time of day. Again, this is tentative because we might get called back to Springfield for Senate action, but it looks like we're going to have this hearing. Senator Morrison's going to chair this hearing Tuesday, July the 25th. And the way to keep up with this is the General Assembly's website is ILGA, so Illinois General Assembly, ilga.gov.
Are those hearings open to the public?
Oh, yeah. And you fill out a witness slip and you can present testimony.
Awesome.
You can speak. But read the rules carefully for how to fill out a witness slip,
Absolutely.
so you don't get shut out. Yes. Yeah, Allison and Julie.
Go ahead, Alice.
Do you know if anything has happened locally to the person who was in charge of the Joliet DCFS office, the person who was running the contest?
No, I don't. No.
Is the director aware of that contest that was happening at the Joliet office?
I don't know if Walker is, but I talked to Sheldon about it. And Sheldon talked about the Blue Star program in Cook County. That was an incentive program to get cases closed. And I asked Sheldon, so I brought up the gift cards at the Joliet office, and I said, are you responsible for this? And this is not a direct quote. He said, I'm responsible for the idea. I'm responsible for motivating supervisors to motivate frontline staff to close cases in a timely manner. Not close them when they're not complete, but get the paperwork in. And of course, we read in your paper that there was a 7-week delay between a DCFS staffer on Jefferson Street writing up his or her handwritten notes and typing them into the state case registry, right? Well, yeah, that was throughout all weeks. And that was the fourth thing that I asked this acting director Walker about. And she said, what's important is the action that DCFS takes after the notes are written up.
Okay, so is somebody from DCFS or Child Protective Services, will somebody be held accountable?
Well, that's the job of us. That's our job, legislators.
Like criminal charges or anything like that?
No, I don't. I'm not a lawyer. I don't think criminal charges. But again, since 8 of these 9, so the 9 recommended changes, one of them we would change by passing a law in Springfield. The other 8 would be DCFS internal procedures. So that's, legislators can call DCFS before the Human Services Committee and also the Appropriations Committee, which I sit on, which is the Budget Committee, and ask them questions and go through these 9 recommendations one by one and say, okay, we're going to look at recommendation number 2. Have you implemented this yet? No, why not? Number 3,
Well,
same
that's
question.
let me ask you this. You did say that you have 9 recommendations, but only one of them is a law-changing one.
Right.
Which one is that?
It's about the sequencing of the investigations that DCFS gave a new number to every investigation, and there were 11 investigations, no, 9? No, 11, at 309 Lewis Road. And so the fact that each one had a different number prevented them from being linked, prevented them from being seen as a whole.
Senator, if I could, on behalf of the community, ask that you take the message back to Springfield when you guys sit before these hearings and committees and recommend that not only that the DCFS director, the new director, accept these because I don't think they formally have accepted the recommendations yet. The DCFS department. It was presented to DCFS. They haven't accepted that. What we would like to see is that they accept these recommendations and not just implement change, but a specific detailed process on how they're going to make sure that those are implemented and followed through. Because you can have a law changed and on the books, and you can have policies and procedures in a standard operating procedure binder, but whether or not they act on those or not are something. So not just changing the procedures and not just changing the law, but a follow-up, an audit, of, so to speak, to make sure that there's follow-through on those new implemented policies. Because we see way too many kids falling through the cracks on these types of situations where there's a policy in place to do X, Y, and Z, but there's no follow-through to make sure, did you really go into the house or did you just drive past and see them dancing outside? Did you really go and see the conditions of the home? The same thing with numerous of children that as we've gone and scratched the surface, you're seeing children that have died all over Illinois because of lack of DCFS, and these are kids that are in DCFS care and custody and contact, and they're getting closed out unfounded for no reason. So if you could take that back.
What can we do?
Yeah, what I would suggest is read the report. And there might be more than 9 things that DCFS should do. DCFS, these outside evaluators that DCFS hired, it's those outside evaluators that made these 9 suggestions for improvement. But you might have suggestions for improvement beyond these 9, right? So get those to me, please.
And will you go ahead and extend that invitation to the new director to visit Joliet?
We would. She wants to come here.
Okay, well, we'd love to meet with her.
Okay. Let me make a note of it. Good.
Getting back to the question about the incentives to pay up, do you support that practice? And do you think there needs to be changes in